This is my true story. I once thought I had the perfect life. A loving wife, a loyal best friend, and a home built on trust. I never imagined the people closest to me would be the ones to tear me apart. What I went through was not just betrayal. It was heartbreak, followed by a revenge that no one expected. I stood in silence, but my actions spoke louder than any words. And today, I want to share that story with you. But before I begin, tell me where you're watching from and subscribe so my story can reach more people. I was a man who believed deeply in the bond of marriage. From the first day I married my wife, I gave her my whole heart without fear or hesitation. She was the center of my world, the woman I trusted more than anyone else. I never doubted her loyalty. I worked hard every day to provide for her, and I believed she would always stand by my side. In her smile, I found peace. In her touch, I found comfort. My faith in her was complete, and I never thought betrayal could enter our home. I gave her freedom, love, and care, never once questioning her actions, never once thinking she would turn away from me. My trust was blind, but it was honest, because I thought honesty was the foundation of love. My best friend was the other person I placed my faith in. He was not just a friend, he was like a brother. We grew up together, shared meals, celebrated birthdays, and helped each other through struggles. I let him into my home without hesitation. I trusted him with my secrets, my dreams, and even my fears. I believed he valued loyalty as much as I did. He was part of my family, in every way. I thought of him as the man who would always stand with me, never against me. I trusted him enough to let him spend hours in my home, even when I was away. To me, he was safe, a part of my inner circle, someone I would defend without question. Together, my wife and my best friend were the two pillars of my personal life. I thought my world was strong because it rested on trust in both of them. I felt secure, knowing that even if life threw storms my way, they would stand with me, not against me. I thought love from my wife and brotherhood from my best friend were unshakable bonds. These were not strangers. They were my family, chosen and loved. My faith in them was absolute, and it shaped how I lived my life every single day. I never locked my phone, never guarded my words, never questioned their closeness because I thought pure trust needed no walls. I would often tell people that my luck in life was not wealth, but the relationships I had built. My wife, who I believed would always hold my heart. My best friend, who I thought would always guard my back. I did not see any danger in their laughter together, their talks, or their presence in each other's lives. To me, it was all innocent because betrayal was the last thing on my mind. Looking back, I see how blind I was, but at that time, my faith was real, and it was strong. I believed love meant no suspicion. I believed friendship meant no doubt. I believed that once trust was given, it could never be broken. My world was built on those beliefs, and I lived with ease, thinking my home was filled with loyalty and respect. That was my weakness, to think everyone's heart was as honest as mine. Every day I carried this faith like a shield, but I did not know that behind me, my shield was already broken. The love I gave freely was not returned with the same purity. The loyalty I offered was not honored in the same way. I was blind because I chose to be blind, because I thought doubt had no place in true love or friendship. But the truth was, my faith made me easy to deceive. My open heart gave them the chance to betray me, because I never imagined they could. Still, at that stage of my life, I was proud of my trust. I thought I was a better man because I believed in people fully. I thought suspicion only created distance, while trust built closeness. I had no idea that this very faith would become the reason for my deepest heartbreak. For years, I believed I was the luckiest man, with a loyal wife and a loyal best friend. In reality, I was the fool who gave them the chance to break me in ways I could not yet imagine. That was my faith. Blind, strong, and complete. It gave me peace while it lasted, but it prepared me for pain I never saw coming. It was the beginning of a story where the people I trusted the most became the people who hurt me the deepest. That is why I now say, faith is beautiful, but when given to the wrong people, it can destroy you more than any enemy ever could. The first cracks in my blind faith were small, almost invisible. They started with moments I did not want to notice, signs I pushed aside because I believed too strongly in loyalty. At first, it was her laughter. My wife's laughter was different when my best friend was around. It lingered longer, it carried a sweetness I had not heard in years. I told myself it was just friendship, just joy between two people who knew each other well. But deep down, something about it unsettled me. I brushed it away, thinking I was imagining things, because I did not want to believe my trust could ever be misplaced. Soon, I noticed her appearance changing. She began to dress differently whenever he was expected. Simple clothes were replaced by brighter dresses, more makeup, more care in her hair. She would check the mirror twice before he arrived, but never did the same for me. I told myself she simply wanted to look her best for guests, that it was a natural thing for a woman to want to appear presentable. I swallowed the unease and chose not to question it, because questioning her meant questioning the very foundation of my faith. Their conversations began to grow longer and more private. What once had been simple talks in the open became hushed voices in corners, laughter shared away from me, words exchanged with eyes I could not understand. Sometimes I would walk into the room and the air would change. They would stop speaking, glance at me quickly, then shift the topic. My chest would tighten in those moments, but I would remind myself that trust meant not assuming the worst. I forced myself to believe it was all innocent because I thought doubting them would make me the guilty one. There were times when she seemed distant with me after spending time with him. Her smile for me was weaker, her patience shorter. Yet when he visited, her energy grew, her face lit up. I began to notice the difference, but I buried it under excuses. I told myself that maybe I was tired from work, maybe she simply enjoyed his humor, maybe I was overthinking. I fought against my own instincts because my heart wanted peace, not conflict. I thought holding on to trust was stronger than facing suspicion. But deep inside, small cracks were spreading. They were cracks in my certainty, in my belief that love and loyalty were unshakable. I began to feel like an outsider in my own home, watching the closeness of two people who should have honored my presence. Sometimes I would lie awake at night, replaying their laughter in my head, wondering why it sounded so different. My heart wanted to deny the truth, but my mind whispered questions I did not want to hear. Still, I stayed silent. I convinced myself that love requires patience, that friendship requires understanding. I told myself I was too proud to be jealous, too trusting to be suspicious. I thought it was better to suffer doubts alone than to accuse the people I loved most. But silence does not erase the truth. It only gives betrayal more room to grow. And as those small cracks deepened, I did not realize they were the beginning of an earthquake that would one day shatter my entire world. Looking back now, I see how blind I was to the early signs. Her laughter, her appearance, her private talks, her distance with me. These were not accidents. They were warnings. They were the whispers of betrayal that I refused to hear. I told myself love was strong, but I did not see that love can be twisted. I told myself friendship was pure, but I did not see that friendship can be poisoned. The cracks were already there, and I walked over them every day, thinking my home was still solid. Those first cracks did not destroy me yet, but they prepared me for heartbreak. They taught me that even the strongest faith can begin to tremble when the truth is too heavy to ignore. My silence delayed the storm, but it could not stop it, and as time went on, the cracks only widened until they became impossible to hide. That was the beginning of my fall, not in one moment, but in many small ones, not in one betrayal, but in countless little signs that I refused to accept. The first cracks were already breaking me, and I did not even realize it. The discovery did not come with fire or shouting. It came in silence, late at night, when the house was quiet and the world outside was dark. I had never been the type of man to check through my wife's belongings. I believed in trust. I believed respect meant giving her privacy, giving her space, giving her freedom. But that night, something inside me was restless. I could not sleep. My mind replayed all the small signs, all the laughter, all the changes I had ignored. My heart wanted peace, but my hands moved on their own. I picked up her phone. At first, I felt guilty. It felt wrong to search. My palms sweated, my chest pounded. I told myself I would only look for a second, just to prove my doubts were wrong, to silence the storm in my head. I thought I would find nothing, and then I would laugh at myself for ever questioning her loyalty. But what I found instead burned me deeper than any wound I had ever known. The messages were hidden in folders I had never seen before. They were not ordinary words between friends. They were filled with secrets, with longing, with the kind of intimacy that belongs only to husband and wife. My eyes froze on each line. Every word was a knife. She called him names meant for me. She told him things she never told me. She spoke of moments they shared when I was not there. Each message was proof that my trust had been betrayed, not by one, but by two people I loved most. As I scrolled further, I found photos. Some were simple smiles, but even those cut deep because the smiles were not for me. Some were too intimate, too close, too shameless to explain away. My heart cracked with every image, every detail that confirmed what I did not want to believe. It was no longer a suspicion. It was truth. My wife and my best friend were lovers behind my back. In that moment, I felt the world collapse. My knees weakened, my chest grew heavy, my breath shallow. It was as if the air in the room had been stolen from me. I could hear my own pulse beating like a drum, my vision blurred with tears I could not hold back. I had always believed betrayal would feel like anger, but what I felt first was emptiness. A hollow silence that swallowed everything inside me. I put the phone down and stared at the ceiling. Memories of my marriage flashed through my mind. Our vows, our promises, our struggles, our triumphs. Memories of my friendship with him also came flooding back. The times we stood side by side, the secrets we shared, the trust I gave him freely. And now, all of it was poisoned. Every memory that once brought me comfort now felt like a cruel trick. My wife had betrayed me. My best friend had betrayed me. Together, they had broken something I thought was unbreakable. The hardest part was the realization that it had been happening right in front of me. They had laughed at me, not just in secret, but in the way they carried on as if I was blind. I had opened my home to both of them. I had defended them against my own doubts, and in return, they had stabbed me where it hurt the most, in my trust. I wanted to scream, but the house was too silent. I wanted to confront her, but the words froze in my throat. Instead, I sat there in the dark, shaking, broken, and silent. My tears fell, but they brought no relief. They were heavy with rage, with sorrow, with humiliation. The man I called brother had stolen the woman I called wife. Together, they had destroyed the peace of my home. But even in that moment of despair, something inside me shifted. The discovery, though it shattered me, also awakened me. It stripped me of my illusions. No more lies, no more excuses, no more pretending. The truth was sharp and clear now, and once truth is seen, it cannot be unseen. My marriage was broken, my friendship was dead, but my will was still alive. I picked up the phone again and stared at the evidence. I knew then that silence would not be enough. This betrayal was too great to hide, too cruel to forgive. I did not know when or how, but I knew one thing with certainty. The world would know what they had done. They had chosen to betray me in the dark, but I would choose to expose them in the light. That night, I did not sleep. I sat with the phone in my hand, my eyes swollen, my body trembling. I replayed their words, their images, their intimacy. Every detail hurt, but every detail also strengthened my resolve. Betrayal had taken my peace, but it had given me a weapon. Proof. Proof that could not be denied. Proof that could tear their lies apart. Proof that would one day end their arrogance. The discovery was my breaking point, but it was also the beginning of my revenge. I had found the truth, and with the truth came power. I would not shout, I would not fight, I would not lower myself to their level, but I would make sure their betrayal was seen by every eye that once respected them. They had laughed in secret. I would make sure the world laughed at them in shame. After the discovery, life did not return to normal. It could not. From the outside, the days looked the same. I went to work, I came home, I ate at the table, I spoke when spoken to, But inside, everything had changed. My heart carried a weight that no one could see. It was a heavy stone pressed against my chest every hour of the day, every night in my sleep. The silent weight of betrayal followed me like a shadow that never let go. At work, I could not focus. My hands moved, but my mind stayed trapped in the messages, the photos, the proof I had found. I saw his face in my memory, the face of the man I once trusted with my life. I heard her voice, the voice that once spoke words of love to me, but now whispered lies to another. My colleagues spoke to me, but I barely heard them. My body sat in the office, but my spirit was elsewhere, broken, replaying the same truth again and again. The nights were worse. The nights had no distraction. The nights brought silence, and in that silence, the voices returned. The laughter I heard on the recordings filled my ears, their words replayed like a cruel song I could not escape. I lay beside her, pretending to sleep, while my chest burned with rage and heartbreak. The woman I held as my wife, the woman I once believed was my partner, was the same woman who had betrayed me with the man I called my brother. I wanted to confront her many times. My tongue burned with questions, with curses, with demands. But every time I opened my mouth, I stopped. She would deny it. She would twist it. She would call me crazy, paranoid, insecure. She had already mocked me in secret for being too trusting. If I confronted her without proof, she would only mock me to my face. So I stayed silent. I carried the truth like a secret burden only I could feel. Silence, however, is its own kind of suffering. Every time she smiled at me, I wondered if it was real or if it was another mask. Every time she touched my arm, I felt the hand of a stranger. Every time I saw him across the fence, waving with that familiar grin, I felt sick. He looked at me as if nothing had happened, as if he had not betrayed me in the cruelest way a friend could. The silent weight pressed harder each day, making my chest ache, making my spirit sink. I found myself avoiding people. I no longer laughed with neighbors. I no longer shared stories with friends. I no longer opened my heart because my heart had already been shattered. Trust was broken, and when trust breaks, it leaves scars no one can see but the one who carries them. I became quieter, colder, but no one knew why. They thought I was simply tired. They thought age was catching up with me. They never knew I was living in a house poisoned by lies. But even as the weight crushed me, it also shaped me. Pain has a way of hardening a man. The nights I could not sleep, I planned. The days I could not focus, I remembered. The truth burned, but it also gave me clarity. The more I carried the weight, the more I understood that silence could not last forever. Sooner or later, the truth had to come out. The weight was not just mine to bear. They had built their happiness on my pain, and one day I would return that pain to them in full. What hurt most was not only the betrayal, but the lies that followed. She would look me in the eye and smile, pretending nothing had happened. He would greet me like a brother, pretending our bond was still pure. Their act was almost worse than the affair itself. To betray is cruel, but to pretend innocence afterward is poison. Every day they acted normal. My heart screamed inside, but my mouth stayed shut. That silence became my prison. The loneliness of betrayal is like no other. A stranger can wound you, but you can forget them. A family member can disappoint you, but you can forgive them. But when your wife and your best friend betray you together, there is no place left to turn. Both pillars of trust collapse at once, leaving you to fall into emptiness. That was the weight I carried. It was not just sadness. It was the crushing truth that the two people closest to me had chosen each other over me. Sometimes I stood in front of the mirror, staring at my reflection, asking myself if it was my fault. Was I not enough as a husband? Was I not enough as a friend? Did I miss signs that were clear? The betrayal poisoned not only my view of them, but also my view of myself. Self-doubt, shame, and humiliation sat heavy on my shoulders. I began to question my worth, though deep inside, I knew the fault was not mine. The fault belonged to their greed, their arrogance, their cruelty. The weight also brought me to one simple truth. I could not live like this forever. To suffer in silence was to let them win. To keep the truth hidden was to protect their lies. I had the proof, I had the weapon, I had the power. But patience was my shield. I knew I could not strike in anger. I needed the right moment, the perfect stage, the time when the truth would cut them deepest. Until then, I carried the weight and let it shape me into steel. So I lived each day quietly, working, eating, pretending, while inside I prepared. The silent suffering became my training ground. The betrayal broke me, but the silence forged me. I learned to smile while burning, to wait while aching, to prepare while suffering. And when the time came, I would no longer carry the weight alone. I would lay it down in front of the world, and they would feel the same crushing pain that had lived in me. I learned to wait and to plan with care. After the discovery and the weight that pressed on my chest, I knew I must not act in blind rage. Anger would let them shout and deny. I wanted the truth to speak clearly and leave no room for lies. So I looked for a moment when many eyes would be present and when their pride would be highest. I watched events, gatherings, and plans. When I heard that my best friend would marry, I knew the day of his wedding would be the perfect stage. A wedding draws family, friends, and people who trust the couple. It would be a place where their lives could be shown for all to see. I gathered every piece of evidence carefully. I collected messages, photos, recordings, and small notes of dates and places. I copied the files to a safe device and tested them many times. I labeled each item so I would not fumble when the moment came. Proof must be clear and complete. I wanted nothing that could be doubted or called fake. I wanted the bride to see the truth with her own eyes and to understand there was no mistake. I reviewed every message until the words were carved into my memory. The recordings had to be plain, and the images had to speak for themselves. I thought about the place and people deeply. The wedding hall would be full of people who cared for them. It would also be full of witnesses who would refuse to accept manipulation once the facts were clear. I envisioned the hush that falls when music stops and the room waits for meaning. That hush would be the moment. I practiced how to move within that hush without shouting, without begging, without anger. I practiced calmness, steady steps, and a slow, simple motion of handing proof to the bride. I would do one thing and then step back. The truth would do the rest. I prepared my face to be steady. I trained myself not to show the wild storm inside. I knew tears might come, but I would not let them steal the clarity of the action. I would be a man of truth, not a man undone. If I showed fury, people might focus on my pain instead of the evidence. If I showed confusion, they might dismiss me. So I rehearsed walking, placing the envelope in her hands and stepping away. The envelope would carry the weight of proof. The small paper would not lie. Technical details mattered as well. I bought a small device that would play recordings clearly on a speaker. I practiced attaching the device and connecting a speaker so that every whisper would be heard plainly. I checked the battery, the volume, and the files. I made sure voices were clear and uncut. I practiced the order of the recordings so the story of betrayal would be complete and coherent. I did not want to confuse people with scattered pieces. The recordings had to form a single flow that showed the pattern, the plan, and the mockery. I also thought about the harm the reveal would bring. I knew exposure would hurt many people beyond the two who betrayed me. A wedding could be ruined, families could be torn, and innocent people would feel shock and shame. I felt the weight of that consequence. I did not take pleasure in imagining the bride's tears. My purpose was not cruelty. It was truth and protection for myself and for others who might be deceived by false smiles. I wanted the lie removed so people could choose with full knowledge. I rehearsed timing until it felt right. I pictured the vows, the quiet moments when a parent might speak, the pause before the first dance, and the lull between speeches. I planned to step forward at the natural silence when attention would be still. That silent breath would be my chance to hand over the proof without interruption. I would not shout. I would not accuse loudly. I would simply place the truth in her hands and let it speak. In private, I watched them from a distance, noting patterns, watching where they met, and learning how their secret moved in the daylight. It was not a pleasant duty, but it gave me the final pieces I needed to be certain. Each detail made the story complete and prevented small excuses from surviving. I wanted the bride to see not just voices, but the pattern of actions that led them there. The recordings would tell the story, and the small notes would show that it was not a single moment, but a steady pattern of betrayal. I prepared for my own feelings. I knew the scene would bring sorrow, but I would not allow sorrow to blur the facts. I practiced standing tall, breathing slow, and speaking only if needed. My goal was to make the moment precise and final, not a long drama. When I reached the center of the room and handed the envelope to the bride, I would look at her with steady eyes and leave the rest to the proof. Once the truth moved, nothing could mend what had been broken, and that was the point. I did not need to make a speech. The evidence would speak. On the final day, I dressed simply and walked into the hall like anyone else. I felt neither joy nor hate in that step, only resolution. The careful planning had done its work. I knew exactly where to stand and when to move. I had rehearsed the motion of handing the envelope many nights before. The plan had been my companion through those dark months, a quiet strategy that turned pain into purpose. And when the moment arrived, I moved with the slow certainty of a man who had learned to wait for the right breath. The moment would end a long, dark chapter. The wedding day came, and I arrived dressed in silence. I did not want to draw eyes to myself too early. I blended with the guests, nodded politely, and took my seat among them. Around me, there was joy and laughter, music and flowers, but none of it touched me. I watched carefully as my best friend stood at the altar, smiling wide with pride. To everyone else, he looked like a man ready for a new life. To me, he looked like a liar dressed in a fine suit, hiding secrets beneath his vows. My wife sat a few rows away. She avoided my eyes the entire time. Her hands fidgeted, and her smile looked forced. She knew the weight of what I carried. The hall was bright, filled with light and people, but for me, it felt like a storm was waiting. I stayed quiet, waiting for the exact moment when silence would fall, when the attention of all would be still. That silence would be my doorway, and I would step through it with the truth in my hand. The wedding hall was full of light, music, and joy, but inside me, there was only silence. I sat on one of the back chairs, watching everything like a man who no longer belonged to the world around him. My best friend was standing tall at the front, smiling wide, wearing the suit of his life, ready to take vows that meant nothing to him because his heart was dirty and his soul was stained. My wife sat on the other side of the room, her hands tight together, her eyes moving everywhere except toward me. She knew I had not spoken to her for weeks, and she feared I carried something inside me that could break her. She was right. I carried proof, and I carried pain, and I carried the fire of revenge that had been eating me alive for months. I did not come to this wedding as a guest. I came as the shadow of truth. As the music softened, the crowd grew quiet. The bride stood in her dress, pure and glowing, not knowing the man she was about to marry had already given his love to another, my wife. The priest asked everyone to rise for the vows. My heart beat slower, not faster. I was calm because the time had come. I pushed my chair back and stood up. The sound was small, but in the silence of that moment, every ear seemed to hear it. Heads turned. I walked forward, step by step, the envelope in my hand feeling heavier than a stone, heavier than my whole life. My eyes stayed fixed on the bride, not on him, not on her. I walked past tables filled with flowers and glasses of wine, past faces of strangers and friends who smiled a second before and now looked puzzled, wondering why an old man was breaking the perfect picture of the wedding. When I reached the front, I did not speak. I did not need to. My silence was stronger than words. I placed the envelope into the bride's hands. She looked at me with confusion, then opened it slowly, her fingers trembling. Inside were the photos, the printed messages, the words of passion and betrayal between my wife and the man who stood beside her. The wedding hall, once filled with joy and laughter, now felt like a storm had broken inside it. The air was heavy, as if every breath carried the weight of betrayal. The bride's hands trembled as she held the papers, then let them fall to the ground. Pages scattered, sliding under chairs, some picked up by guests who could not believe what their eyes saw. Murmurs grew into gasps, and gasps grew into shouts. The crowd was no longer celebrating a union. They were witnessing a collapse, a truth too sharp to ignore. My best friend, the man I once trusted with my life, stood frozen in place, his face drained of color. His bride turned away from him, her veil shaking with every sob. Her dream of love, her promise of forever, had been crushed in a single moment by the proof I placed in her hands. The whispers spread like fire. "How could he?" one voice said. "With his best friend's wife?" another added. Fingers pointed, heads shook, and the shame grew heavier with each second. The groom tried to step forward, tried to speak, but his words caught in his throat. His voice was drowned by the noise of anger and disbelief. No excuse could survive the storm that had begun. My wife sat still, her face pale, her body small, shrinking under the weight of every eye staring at her. She was not just a wife anymore. She was the woman who destroyed her home and her friend's wedding. There was no place for her to hide. The bride's sorrow turned to fury. Her tears became fire. She picked up the papers from the floor and threw them at his chest. The sound of them hitting him was louder than any slap. The hall erupted with gasps and cries as she shouted her pain, but I did not need to hear her words to understand them. Her voice was the sound of a heart breaking. Guests pulled her back, some tried to comfort her, others stared at the groom with disgust. The family of the bride gathered around her, their faces filled with rage and disappointment. Mothers held her close, fathers shook with anger, brothers clenched their fists. The groom had not only betrayed me, he had betrayed her family, and in that hall, every soul turned against him. Friends who once laughed with him at parties now refused to look him in the eye. Some shouted, some cursed, some pushed him back when he tried to step forward. His smile was gone, his pride was gone, his mask had been torn away. My wife lowered her face, hiding behind her hands, but whispers found her too. "Shame," voices said. "How could she?" Others looked at her with pity, but pity was no shield. She was broken, and her tears meant nothing to anyone anymore. The wedding collapsed before vows could even be spoken. The music stopped. The priest closed his book. The hall that was decorated with flowers and light now felt like a graveyard of trust. No one cared for the cake, the rings, or the dance that was meant to come. The only thing left in that hall was betrayal, raw and uncovered. The groom's parents stood silent, unable to defend him. The bride's parents held their daughter close, their faces marked with the shame of what had been revealed. I stood still, watching, not gloating, not smiling. I was not there to celebrate their ruin. I was there to let truth speak for itself. And truth had spoken. The groom tried to reach the bride again, his hands stretched out in desperation, but she pushed him away, her voice shaking with rage. "No more!" she cried. Though I had not planned her words, they became the final cut. His future with her was gone, erased in front of everyone. The guests left their tables, some walked out, some stayed only to watch the fire burn. The joy of the wedding had died, and in its place stood humiliation and despair. The fallout spread wider with every passing minute. People whispered about how long it had been going on, how blind I must have been, how cruel they both had been to betray me in secret. But now, the secret was gone. It belonged to the world. No one could cover it, no one could twist it. The shame was carved into their names, into their faces. The hall that was once filled with laughter now carried the sound of judgment, anger, and broken hearts. I did not raise my hand. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. Their ruin unfolded without me pushing it. All I did was hand over the proof, and the truth did the rest. The bride's tears drowned the wedding vows. The groom's silence became his punishment. My wife's shame became her prison. The guests became witnesses, and in that hall, there was no way out. The fallout was complete, and it would follow them long after the lights of that wedding were turned off. I turned away before the shouts grew louder. I had seen enough. The hall could keep its whispers and its anger. I did not need to stay. I had come to deliver the truth, and I had delivered it. Their ruin was no longer mine to carry. It was theirs, and it would stay with them forever. The bride's face changed from curiosity to horror. Her lips parted, her breath broken, her hands shaking. She looked at the papers again and again, as if hoping her eyes lied, but they did not. Every line was sharp, every picture was proof. The hall grew restless. Whispers began, like small winds before a storm. I did not look at the guests. I kept my eyes on her, the bride, the innocent woman who deserved the truth. She lifted her face, and in her eyes was pain deeper than any cut. The groom's smile vanished. He reached for her, but she pulled away, holding the envelope against her chest like a shield. She turned to him with a stare that was fire, and everyone in the hall felt the burn. My wife lowered her head, her skin pale, her body small under the weight of shame. She knew it was over. Still, I said nothing. My silence screamed louder than any voice. The proof spoke for me. The proof was my weapon. The bride's tears began to fall, each drop heavy, each drop breaking the moment that was supposed to be the happiest of her life. Gasps spread through the guests. Mothers held their children closer. Fathers shook their heads. Friends of the groom looked at him with disgust, as if they had never known him. The music that once filled the air was gone. Only the sound of her crying remained, mixed with the whispers of betrayal. I stepped back slowly, giving space to the truth. The bride dropped the envelope, the pages spilling on the floor like ashes of love. Guests bent down to pick them up, eyes scanning the words, eyes widening with shock. Now, the secret was no longer a secret. It belonged to everyone. No corner of the hall was safe for my wife or for him. They stood exposed, naked in their lies, while I stood tall in silence. In that moment, I did not feel joy. I did not feel victory. I felt empty. But in that emptiness, I felt clean. For months, I carried their sin inside my chest, burning me from within. Now, it was no longer mine to hold. I had given it back to them and to the world. I looked once at my wife. She could not lift her eyes. Her pride was broken. I looked once at my best friend. His lips moved, searching for excuses, but no sound came. The hall did not allow it. The truth was too heavy for his lies to carry. I turned my face away from them, back toward the bride. Her pain was deep, but there was also strength in her eyes. She had been saved from a life of lies before it began. That was the only peace I found. I nodded gently to her, and she understood. I was not there to destroy her. I was there to set her free. Then, without a word, I stepped away. The hall erupted behind me. Gasps, shouts, anger, tears. But I walked slowly, calmly, like a man who had finally laid down a heavy load. The revelation was complete. They whispered in secret, but I let the world hear them. When the hall was filled with voices louder than the music, I knew my time there was over. I had no reason to stay among the chaos I had set free. The truth was already burning the ground under their feet, and I did not need to see more. I stood slowly, my body calm, my heart steady. I did not rush. I did not stumble. Every step I took was heavy, but it carried no regret. My shoes echoed against the floor as I moved toward the door, but no one stopped me. They were too busy with their anger, their tears, their shame. The hall had become a cage of ruin, and I was walking out of it free. As I passed the rows of chairs, I could hear the whispers following me. Some called me brave, some pitied me, some just stared in silence. But I did not turn my head. Their voices were nothing compared to the storm I had lived through in silence for so long. I had carried the weight of betrayal, the pain of knowing that the woman I loved and the man I trusted most had destroyed me behind closed doors. Now that weight was no longer mine. It belonged to them. The shame was theirs to hold, not mine. I reached the doors of the hall and felt the cool air outside waiting for me. Behind me, I could still hear the cries of the bride, the shouts of her family, the hollow voice of the groom trying to defend what could never be defended. My wife sat somewhere in the back, hiding her face, but I did not look for her. I had no more tears left for her. I had no more words left for her. She had chosen her path, and tonight the world had seen it clearly. I pushed the doors open and stepped into the night. The air outside was quiet, almost too quiet compared to the storm I had left inside. The stars above looked down like witnesses, but they gave no judgment. The street was empty, and for the first time in many years, I felt light. My chest was no longer filled with secrets, my back no longer bent under the weight of betrayal. I walked slowly down the steps of the hall, leaving the noise behind me. Each step was a release, each breath a reminder that I had survived. I did not look back, not even once. I knew what was happening behind those doors. I knew lives were being torn apart, vows were dying before they could be spoken, pride was crumbling into dust. That was no longer my concern. My part was done. I had delivered the truth, and I had delivered it at the moment it would cut the deepest. Now I could leave with dignity. I could leave with silence. And silence was more powerful than any shout of rage could ever be. As I walked home, I thought about the years I had given them both, my wife and my best friend. The laughter we shared, the meals, the secrets, the trust. All of it had been burned by their choices. But I was not leaving with bitterness. I was leaving with clarity. Betrayal had broken me once, but revenge had rebuilt me. I had not screamed. I had not fought. I had not begged. I had simply shown the truth. And the truth spoke louder than I ever could. My wife would have to face the world now. My best friend would carry his shame wherever he went. His bride, though broken, would thank me one day for sparing her from building a future on lies. And I, the man they once thought blind, had walked away with his head held high. They had called me weak, they had mocked me in secret, but tonight they saw the strength they had underestimated. Strength is not in fists or in rage. Strength is in standing tall when the world expects you to fall. I reached my home, the same home that had once felt like a prison of lies. But tonight it felt different. Tonight it felt like my own. The walls no longer echoed with secrets. The rooms no longer hid shadows. It was empty, yes, but it was honest. And I preferred honest emptiness over crowded betrayal. I sat in my chair, closed my eyes, and let the silence wrap around me. It was not the silence of loneliness anymore. It was the silence of peace. From that night on, I never spoke another word to either of them. They tried, I heard, to reach me later. Letters were sent, messages left, even tears at my door, but I never opened it. I had already given them my last gift, the truth, and it was enough. I did not need to argue. I did not need to forgive. I did not need to explain. My exit from that hall was my final word, and it was louder than any speech could ever be. Walking away was not weakness. Walking away was victory, because I did not leave broken. I left whole. I left knowing that the lies no longer lived in me. They lived in them, and that was their burden to carry until their last day. My silence was not emptiness. It was a choice to let the truth stand without my voice beside it, a choice to leave the battlefield without a scar, a choice to live the rest of my life free. And so, my exit became the moment I found myself again. Not as a husband, not as a friend, but as a man who survived betrayal and stood taller because of it. I walked out of that hall with nothing in my hands, but everything in my heart. Dignity, peace, and freedom. That was my revenge. That was my victory. The days after my exit passed like long shadows. The noise of that night faded, but its echo remained inside me. I did not replay the moment with pride or with regret. I simply remembered it as it was. The night the truth finally broke free. For years, I had carried the weight of silence, wondering if exposing them would destroy me more than it would destroy them. But when I walked out of that hall, I realized something important. The truth never destroys the one who speaks it. It destroys only those who tried to bury it. Each morning, I woke up to the sound of birds outside my window. Their voices were gentle, unbothered by the storms of men. I listened to them and thought, life goes on. The world does not pause for broken hearts or for betrayal. The sun rises, the earth turns, and we either rise with it or we stay buried in our pain. I chose to rise. It was not easy, but it was necessary. I began to notice the small things again, the way the light fell through the curtains in the morning, the smell of fresh tea, the cool air on my skin during evening walks. For years, I had walked through life without truly seeing these things. My mind had been trapped in suspicion, in pain, in the endless loop of asking, why? Why would she betray me? Why would he do this to me? But those questions never had answers. They were empty holes that only swallowed peace. When I stopped asking them, I found freedom. Sometimes I thought of my wife, not with love, not with hate, but with distance. She had been my companion, my partner, the woman I believed would walk beside me until the end. But she had chosen another path, a darker one. I could not rewrite her choices, and I no longer wished to. She became a closed chapter, one I would not open again. It hurt, yes, but the pain was no longer sharp. It was like an old scar, there, but no longer bleeding. I thought of my friend too, the man who once laughed at my table, who once swore loyalty in youth, who once said he would never harm me. His betrayal cut deeper than hers. A friend is supposed to guard your blind side, not stab you in it. I wondered if he thought of me at night, if guilt chewed at him the way silence once chewed at me. But again, that was not mine to worry about. His soul was his own to wrestle with, and I had already let it go. The town whispered about what had happened. Some said I was cruel for exposing them so publicly. Some said I was brave. Some called me wise. But I did not care for their words. People will always speak. Today they praise, tomorrow they condemn. Their voices shift like the wind, but the truth remains steady, like a rock in the river. I did not act for their approval. I acted for my own peace, and peace is what I had gained. Nights were the hardest. Loneliness has a way of growing louder when the world grows quiet. I would sit in my chair and stare at the walls, feeling the emptiness of the house. Memories would walk through the rooms like ghosts, her laughter in the kitchen, his voice on the porch, the echoes of gatherings we once shared. For a moment, I would feel the weight of loss pressing down again. But then I reminded myself, those memories were already poisoned long before I uncovered the truth. They were not golden treasures. They were broken glass. And broken glass does not deserve to be held tightly. So instead of clinging to the past, I began to shape new habits. I read books I had long ignored. I walked further each evening, sometimes greeting neighbors, sometimes just listening to the silence of the streets. I planted a small garden in the back, simple flowers that did not ask for much but returned beauty all the same. Slowly, the house began to feel alive again, not because of people, but because of peace. With time, I came to realize that betrayal had given me something strange, something unexpected, clarity. Before, I trusted blindly. I gave without pause. I assumed loyalty was natural. But now, I understood the value of watching closely, of protecting the heart without closing it. I learned that love is not about possession, and friendship is not about shared laughter. Both are about respect. Without respect, there is nothing but shadow. I also learned the meaning of strength. Many men think strength is in holding on to love, holding on to friendship, holding on to hope, even when it rots in their hands. But true strength is in letting go, to release the rope when it burns your palms, to walk away when the house is already on fire, to stand tall when your world crumbles, and to build a new one from the ashes. That is strength. And that is what betrayal had forced me to discover. As the months passed, the whispers in town grew quieter. People moved on to new scandals, new stories, new dramas to feed on. But I remained still, steady, untouched. My story was not theirs to control. It was mine, and I had chosen to close it with silence. I never defended myself, never explained myself, never tried to paint myself as a hero. Heroes seek glory. I sought peace, and peace is what I had, at last. Now, When I look back at that night, I do not see revenge as fire or as destruction. I see it as light. A light that exposed the shadows. A light that freed me from the cage of secrets. A light that allowed me to walk away with my dignity. They thought they had broken me. But in truth, they had built me. Because without their betrayal, I would never have discovered the strength I carry today. And so I live quietly, without noise, without bitterness. My days are simple, my nights are calm. I no longer wait for apologies. I no longer dream of justice. I already have justice because I have peace. Betrayal gave me scars, but it also gave me wisdom. And wisdom is the greatest revenge of all. Now, as an old man, I look back without anger. The betrayal hurt deeply, but it also taught me who I am and what matters. I learned to trust carefully, but never blindly again. My story is not about revenge for its own sake. It is about truth, dignity, and standing tall, even when those closest to you fail. I tell it so others understand that exposing lies does not make you cruel, it makes you strong. In the end, I kept my peace, my pride, and my life. The lesson stayed with me forever.